Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of Straight Talk Whiskey. I'm Nick here as always, and this is episode number 38 on our weekly video series of whiskey reviews. And today what we have for you is something that stems back way far back in history. And that is Paddy Irish whiskey. Now, so this dates back to roughly the late 18th century, and it was produced by Cork distillers in Cork, Ireland. And basically, you had a ton of people competing at the market at this time. We probably don't even have full records of all the distilleries that were around at that time. But anyway, Paddy was one of them who were unique in the way that their whiskey tasted. Now, it's always been perpetuated as, compared to the competition, a nice, smooth whiskey, of course with the triple distillation and, the malted barley sort of notes that are more substantial in it. Right, so this was, compared to other whiskeys which could be seen as more harsh back then, were, kind of pitted against this as being, a nice, smoother whiskey. So, basically, what we have, how do we get the name? Well, there was a young salesman named Paddy Flaherty back then in the 18th century who was looking for a job. And basically, I've heard some different stories. I heard that he was the one that was working in the distillery putting, corks on bottles and that sort of thing. And then he eventually moved up, as the story would have it, to a salesman who went around on the old pony and trap, method of conveyance, which after visiting Ireland several months ago and got to experience that sort of transportation, it was really interesting to see sort of how that might have been to travel around back then. And of course there were trains as well that would have been operating at that time. So, Paddy was very famous for his unorthodox methods of going into bars and pubs and taverns, that sort of thing, and offering people a sample, of his whiskey. And so, as time went on, he gained a bigger and bigger reputation around the country. It came a time when there was sort of a shortage of Irish whiskey, and so basically whenever the bartenders were low on their stock, they said, they'd write on, a case or a barrel, whatever the order was, that they wanted more of Paddy Flaherty's whiskey. So that's sort of how we get there, and I believe it was, I just want to get the date right, 1913, the distillery eventually gave him the ultimate honor, really, of changing their whiskey to Paddy Irish whiskey, which is really interesting because nowadays Paddy is sort of on the bottom shelf. When you go into stores, it's not even on par with the Jameson or the Bushmills or the Tullamore. It's sort of lower than that, depending on your store. And it's basically kind of turned into this sort of culture that is like, it's for partying, it's for, fun nights, mixing it up. So you'll see a lot of times in advertisements and promotional material will be Paddy with, mixing it, or people partying at the bar, that sort of thing, slamming back shots. So it is kind of interesting. I feel like the reputation has sort of gotten tarnished a little bit. Now, just a reminder, this is owned by Pernod Ricard, which, is one of the largest, spirits and beverage owners in the entire world. There's certainly some others up there, Diageo and that sort of thing. But, they're one of the bigger ones, and now it's produced in Middleton, which is pretty close to the city of Cork. And so basically, what we have now is sort of the lower end of the whiskey, but that doesn't mean that, you know, the flavor has to suffer at all. It's just how it's been, you know, kind of marketed and that sort of thing. It would be interesting, instead of going to the flavored, you know, the flavored blended whiskeys that you see out there with, you know, Jim Beam, Jack Daniels, and all these other sort of thing. You got Bushmills Honey. Paddy has some, and I forget exactly what they are. I think there's 2 of them out there. It might be like an apple or a honey or something like that. But as you know, I don't really prefer those things. You know, they're perfectly fine. I'm not knocking them at all. But it's just not something that I personally drink a lot, so I don't know a ton about it. But I know that the 2 other variations under the Paddy label are those blends, those liqueurs. So it would be interesting if they kind of took note of what everybody else really is doing, is, you know, innovating with ages and you know, different ways of maturation, different casks, different, you know, independent sort of bottlings, you know, things that aren't going to be out there forever. I think would be really interesting if they could do that. So let's get into the taste test. Wow, right off the bat, you have something totally different from sort of the other standard Irish whiskeys that you might reach for on the shelf or at the bar, which are sometimes more fruitier and light and honeyed in their nose. Whereas this is just a real fresh maltiness going on in there. Definitely the pot still content. The pot still whiskey that's made and blended in this to make Paddy is definitely substantial in this, which I think is wonderful. Now, I don't know an exact age that it's matured for, but the website and other things that I've looked up, researched on it, say up to 7 years. So it's really kind of hard to tell. But if you do the old, you know, stroll around the glass, as another whiskey reviewer out there mentioned, which is a totally great term, you couldn't see that it does have a little bit of legs on there. It's hard to see again on the camera, but trickling down a little bit, which makes me think that it's a little bit older than 3 years. Is there caramel in it? I don't think so. It doesn't appear to be so. If there is, it's a very small amount. Chill filtering? Probably. Who knows? It doesn't say that it's not. So, but definitely those traditional Irish whiskey notes of honey, fresh cut grass, slightly lemony, but still the overpowering there of this fresh malt that's in there, which is really nice, and it's definitely makes me think that this is going to be pretty smooth. It's been a really long time since I've had Paddy, so this is kind of almost my first impressions again of it, you know, looking at it critically, if you will. One thing that it has going for it, which is spot on to how it's advertised and paying homage to the history of it, it's definitely really smooth. It's got this lovely malty characteristic to it. It just sort of rolls around like a gentle rolling of the waves in the ocean, to be poetic about it. But it's got a nice sort of tartness to it. It's not completely subdued, and it's not detracting in flavor. You know, it's not weak, if you will. That's what I'm trying to say. But it's nice and smooth. Let's go in for some more little nuances here. Really nice. Some fresh fruits definitely in there. A little hint of citrus, some apple, some grapefruit in there. But for being bottled at, you know, 80 proof, 40% ABV, it's got a lovely sort of story to it when it enters the tongue. You get this fresh malt characteristic, and then what you have as it goes down, as you drink it, you get this nice tart, sort of like sugary candle, like a sweet tart almost, like sweet note in there, a little bit of honey, not much cask influence in terms of oakiness or anything like that that the bourbon barrels might have imparted to it, which are definitely in here, as we know, because maturation makes up such a huge part of giving flavor to a whiskey, but not overly stated in the taste. There's also, which is really imparting a lot of this flavor here, is the triple distillation. And sometimes the triple distillation is great. It's another thing to put on the bottle. But with the amount of time spent in oak and the quality of the maturation, sometimes the oakiness and vanilla notes and the ex-bourbon characteristics get into the whiskey more than does the this really bountiful contact with the copper pot stills. Remember, this goes through 3 pot stills. So you have the wash, faints, and spirit still as this goes through, each time getting more and more refined, getting a purer spirit. But the copper does impart a lot, of body to it, if you will, and some flavors, certainly. You can sort of get that sort of coppery tone in here. And no, it's really wonderful, and it's I almost feel bad in a way that this is sort of put sort of on the bottom shelf and that sort of thing, and it's kind of just written off really. Like Paddy is if you were to go online and look up the past couple of years maybe of like whiskey awards or something like that, you wouldn't see Paddy listed there on any of them. Really, I mean, I could be wrong. I could go on and find this, but to the best of my knowledge, you're not going to see Paddy, on there as one of the better blended Irish whiskeys. You're just not, which is a shame because I don't want people to discount it, and I think it'd be great if you get a chance to try some. It's really cheap. I think here the 750 milliliter bottle is roughly $25-ish. So not terribly priced. In a really flavorful Irish whiskey, and definitely something if you're looking to just get into Irish whiskeys. This is definitely another great route to go. I know I had a comment about somebody getting into the Irish whiskey and which way to go. And I mentioned Tullamore being a great way to go because it's not overpowering. It's not that sophisticated. Meaning you don't need sort of an evolved palate, right? If you've been at it for a couple of years or so, you can pick out all the little things in it, but in a whiskey, but in Tullamore and in something like Paddy, it really gives you a good amount to work with if this is your first sort of introduction into Irish whiskey. But if it's not, and you've had it, if you've had whiskeys in general a lot, especially Irish whiskey, you can go and get Paddy and find some really great nuances to it. And that also helps you, and maybe we'll do this video at some point, but taking sort of our entry-level Irish whiskeys and Paddy, Jameson, Bushmills, Tullamore, all of these sorts of things. There's probably a few others on the list that we could put in there, but those, I guess, 4 would be the most readily available, decently priced Irish whiskeys that we could compare, and maybe that'll be interesting to do in the future. But yeah, taste one last sip, see if we missed anything or not. It is lovely just how much that maltiness comes through there. It's something that you can just sit there and sip on and savor. And there's no mistake in my mind why Paddy Flaherty was so popular at the time. Probably a little bit questionable in his practices, and I'm sure we all wish we had somebody like that, who could come into the bar and be like, hey, try this, try this, try this. I'm sure you'd have, a crowd following up outside the door to the next place. on his list. But just a really, really wonderful thing, and a great story too. That's something that gets discounted a lot, is the history and the story behind a lot of these whiskeys, because there's so much rich history behind these things, because most of these whiskeys date back to the 18th century. That's a pretty common thing that goes there, and some, like Bushmills, claims to go back to the beginning of the 17th century. So whether there's a ton of others out there that do the same, that's yet to be determined. But enough said. There's a lot of history behind it, and it's really wonderful. So let's go in for a score. Let's say. Yeah, that's good. So for Paddy Irish Whiskey, episode number 38, if I'm not mistaken, we'll go with a 90 out of 100, and all my scores are always based upon its other competition in the market. So I'm not pitting this up against Middleton Very Rare Irish Whiskey. Right, while it is blend, it's not on the same level, you know what I mean? So you sort of have to look at it for what it is, a blend, right? It's not a single malt or pot still. So you have to put it on par with that, and then put it on par with other things that are similar in price. So for the price, for what it is, 90 out of 100 seems sufficient. You could probably argue with me until the end of time about the score, but it really doesn't matter. It's just sort of an opinion thing that you can take with a grain of salt. So yeah, that's this week's Straight Talk Whiskey. Now we will be having a video sort of towards the end of the week, maybe Friday, probably Saturday though. In addition to our weekly whiskey review, it will be a special one because it is a Philadelphia Fine Wine and Good Spirits Festival here in the city of Brotherly Love. So we'll be there. I'll be taking some footage there. Hopefully get to talk to some people, some representatives, some brand ambassadors of the different companies and distilleries that are going to be there. I heard there's over 200. Last year I went and it was a pretty good showing. So we'll see what's going on there. We'll see if there's anything new. We'll see if we got any interesting people we could interview and that sort of thing. It'll be fun. It'll be a good time. And so I hope you enjoy that video. And I hope you're enjoying the ride with us as I'm enjoying doing it every week. It's a lot of fun. And, it keeps the whole whiskey universe and us people as whiskey enthusiasts, people who are interested in just getting into it. We got veterans, we got connoisseurs, whiskey bar owners, all of them. We welcome you, and it's a great time for whiskey, and it's a great time to pour yourself a glass if you haven't already. And if you do, please drink responsibly, and we'll see you next time. Sláinte.